All right, guys, time to review for the quarterfinal. So we're going to go through the 15 questions that you need to be prepared to solve. I'll give you some examples and just do a quick little review. Now, I'm going to go kind of fast. You've already learned this. This should be a review. If there's things that you don't understand, if you have questions, you need to make sure you come in and ask me. Okay, so number one on the review, graph the equation and then describe the transformation. First of all, it's going to give you a graph, y equals something times the absolute value of x. And there's a couple of rules that you need to remember. If there's something in front of the x, if there's something in front of this absolute value, if there's something in front of parentheses, if there's something in front of the square root, that is either going to stretch it and make it tall and skinny, or it's going to compress it and make it short and squatty. So if that number in front is a fraction, like 1/4, that's going to make it short and squatty. If that number in front is like this one, if it's a 4, that's going to make it taller and skinnier. And the fact that it's a negative just flips it upside down. So you have your absolute value graph that normally is just a V, but it's flipped upside down and it's skinnier than normal, which is going to give you A is going to be your answer. So you select the right picture, hit OK. Then it wants you to describe the transformation. And on this case, it's reflected over the X because it's pointed down, but it's also stretched vertically. That 4 stretches it. Now remember, some of you might see 1/4 absolute value X. If there's a fraction in front of the absolute value, it's not stretched, it's compressed. But in this case, it's not a fraction, it's a 4. So my answer would be that it's stretched and it's reflected across the x-axis. Okay? All right, moving on. Number 2, write an absolute value equation for the graph on the right. So this one gives you a graph and you have to write the equation to go with it. One thing I would do if I was you, before you submit your answer, whatever you think the answer is, put that into your calculator and make sure it looks correct. First of all, this graph is shifted to the, let me make it so I can write. This graph is shifted to the left 1. So my absolute value means to shift it to the left 1 means that I have a +1 on the inside. Remember, that will shift it the opposite direction, left or right. So I'm going to have a +1. And then it's shifted 1, 2, 3 down, which means I have a -3 on the outside. Inside the absolute value shifts it the opposite, left and right. Outside shifts it up or down. So a -3 on the outside makes it go down 3. But a couple other things are happening. For one, it's pointed down instead of up, which means there's a negative in front. And the second thing that's happening is when I go from my vertex, when I go over 1, I go down 1, 2, 3, 4 times before I hit the graph again. So every time I go over 1, I have to go down 4 to hit the graph, which means in front, I'm going to have a 4. If I went over 1 down 3, this would be a 3 out in front. So I think that my answer is -4 absolute value x + 1 -3. So remember, shifts it left and right in the opposite direction. Shifts it up and down in the direction that it should. The -3 shifts it down. The negative flips it over. The 4 stretches it. All right, so that would be your final answer. Okay, number 3, graph the function. A couple of ways that you can do this. Y equals square root of x - 4. Just plug it in your calculator. See what it looks like. Go to y equals, let's get rid of these equations. Y equals square root of x - 4. Now remember, this -4 under the square root means that it's going to be shifted to the right 4 units. So when I graph this, whoops, I'm zoomed out kind of funny. Let me change my zoom a little bit. It shouldn't start at 0. It should start 1, 2, 3, 4 to the right, which it does. So let's find the picture that matches that one. This is a straight line. This one's shifted up. This one is only shifted over 1. D is shifted over 4. So that's going to be my correct answer. All right, number 4. Determine the domain of the function. F of x equals the square root of x minus 5. Remember that underneath the square root, we cannot have a number that's a negative. You can't take the square root of a negative number. That's an imaginary number. So when it wants the domain, it wants to know what x values are possible. So what are my possible x values? When I look at x minus 5, so right now I have square root of x minus 5. One way to do this is just plug that in my calculator. Square root of x minus 5, and this is probably going to be the easiest way. Instead of x minus 4, I'm going to put x minus 5. And when I graph that, my x values are my values going left to right. So if you notice, my graph isn't over here, or here, or here, or here, or here. My graph doesn't start until x equals 5. And then it goes to the right. So x can equal 6, x can equal 7, and 8, and 9, which means when I'm finding the domain, get to the right page here, the domain of f of x is, and it wants it in interval notation, which means that we're going to put parentheses and brackets. So the smallest that my, whoops, wrong bracket. The smallest that my x value can be is 5. And it can go all the way up to infinity because it goes up forever. So I'm going to put a bracket next to the 5 because when I looked at my graph, it can actually be 5. And then it goes up and my x's get bigger forever. So my interval would be from 5 all the way up to infinity. And that'll be our right answer. Okay, number 5. This one I think is one of the ones that will give you a little bit more trouble on the test, just because of the notation. If you look at f and g of x, f of x equals 4 times 6 to the x power. G of x equals 3 times 6 to the x power plus 7. First thing it wants us to find is f minus g of x, which means I'm going to take f of x and I'm going to minus g of x. So I'm going to take 4 times 6 to the x, and I'm going to minus 3 times 6 to the x plus 7. Now notice that I put g of x in parentheses. I did that on purpose because I can't just minus the 3 times 6 to the x. I have to minus the whole parenthesis. So when I simplify, I have to distribute that negative. So 4 times 6 to the x minus 3 times 6 to the x, and a negative times 7 is a negative 7. And here's where it looks a little bit funny because I have 4 times 6 to the x. All that means is that I have 4 6 to the x's. I've got 4 of them. But then I'm going to minus 3 of them away. And 4 minus 3 means that I just have 1 6x. It's kind of like saying 4a minus 3a equals just a. So 4 6 to the x's minus 3 6 to the x's is just 6 to the x. And then I still have my minus 7. So that's going to be part A. That'll be your answer for part A. You would put 6 to the x minus 7. Then it wants, what's f minus g of 3? And all that means is I've already found f minus g. So all I have to do is plug 3 in for x. So 6 to the third minus 7. So 6 to the third is 6 times 6 times 6. And then we're going to minus 7. So if we go 6, whoops, let's go to our home window. 6 raised to the third is 216. And if I minus 7, my answer comes out to 209. So my answer for f minus g of 3 would just be 209. So I would have 6 to the x minus 7 as part A, and part B would just be 209. All right, number 6. Let f of x equal x minus 1. and g of x equal x squared plus 2. Find f of g of negative 6. So this means that, remember this of sign right here, f of g of negative 6 means that I'm going to take negative 6 and I'm going to plug it into g first. So here's my g function, x squared plus 2, and I'm going to plug in a negative 6. So negative 6 squared plus 2. If you do this on your calculator, make sure that negative 6 is in parentheses. Otherwise, it's going to give you the wrong answer. Negative 6 squared is 36 plus 2, which equals 38. So when I plug negative 6 into g, I get 38. Now I have to plug that into f. That's what this little circle means, f of g of negative 6. So f is x minus 1, but instead of x, I'm going to plug in my 38, which equals 37. So your answer, f of g of negative 6, is just going to be 37. Hopefully some of this is coming back to you. All right, number 7, Kara's Custom Tees experiences fixed costs of $500. That means no matter what, she has a cost of $500 and a variable cost of $5 a shirt, which means she has $5 plus $5 or $500, excuse me, plus $5 per shirt. So 5x. Write an equation that can be used to determine the total expense. Let x be the shirts. So there's my shirts. And let c of x be the total. So my total cost is my fixed cost plus however many, the cost for how many shirts I make. So c of x, my total cost equals the $500 plus 5 times x. So that would be part 1. 500 plus 5x, where x represents the number of shirts. Then it says calculate the cost of producing 6 shirts. Well, to do that, all I have to do is plug 6 into my function. So 500 plus 5 times 6, which is 30. So your total cost would be 530. So your fixed cost plus your variable cost equals your total cost. And it'll give you a value to plug in and get the right answer. Okay, number 8. The formula s equals 16t squared is used to approximate the distance s. So let's start writing this out a little bit. S equals 16t squared. S is distance in feet. Then an object falls from rest in t seconds. So t represents how many seconds it's falling. The height of a building is 1,005 feet. How long would it take for an object to fall from the top? So the object, we want it to fall from a distance of 1,005 feet. And it wants to know how long is that going to take to hit the bottom. So 1,005 equals 16t squared. So I divide both sides by 16. 1,005 divided by 16, I don't know what that is. I'll tell you though. 1,005 divided by 16 is going to be 62.8125. So 62.8125 equals t squared. And then to figure out to undo the t squared, I need to take the square root of both sides. So I'm going to square root the t squared and end up with t. And then I'm going to square root 62.8125, which is an ugly number. And when I square root that, I'm going to get a decimal like this, 7.9254. And it keeps going. But if I look right here, simplify your answer. Type an integer or a decimal rounded to the nearest tenth. So my 7.92, I want to round it to the tenths place, which is just going to be 7.9 because that 2 makes me round down. So it would take about 7.9 seconds for an object to fall that far. All right, number 9, solve the equation for y. All right, here's something that's a little bit more fresh, something that we've done more recently. So we have YW plus YQ equals R. I've got to get Y by itself. So the first thing I'm going to do is factor the Y out of both of these. I'm going to distribute backwards. I'm going to pull the Y out, and I'm left over with W plus Q equals R on the inside. Now, Y multiplied by W plus Q, the opposite is to divide by W plus Q. So Y is equal to R divided by W plus Q. That would be your final answer. So remember, factor out the Y. It's just distributing backwards. We want to take a Y out of both of these, and then you're left with multiplying. So we divide both sides. All right, number 10. I think it looks like here we're going to start getting more into what we've done in this newer unit. So hopefully these things are a little bit more fresh for you. Solve the system by elimination. There's a lot of different ways you can do this. Again, I don't care if you set everything equal to Y and graph. I don't care if you solve for Y and plug it in for the other Y. But let's do it the way that it wants us to. Solve by elimination. So I have 3x plus 4y equals 18. And then I have 2x minus 1y equals 1. The problem with elimination is my x's don't match and my y's don't match. But I want one of them to match. So to make my y's match, the easiest way to do that is to multiply everything on the bottom by 4. Because if I want this to be a 4, so that these two match, everything has to be multiplied by 4. So I still have 3x plus 4y equals 18. But now 4 times 2x is 8x. 4 times negative y is negative 4y. And 4 times 1 is just 4. So in order to get the y's to go away, I want to add everything on top to everything on the bottom, because a 4 plus a negative 4 is 0. So 3x plus 8x is 11x. 4y plus negative y is nothing. And 18 plus 4 is 22. So now I just have 11x equals 22. So if I divide both sides by 11, x equals 2. Now I'm not done. That's my x value. But I also need to know what my y value is. So I need to plug this x back into one of my equations. So let's do it into the second one. 2 times 2 minus y equals 1. 2 times 2 is 4 minus y equals 1. If I minus 4 from both sides, negative y equals negative 3. And to get rid of this negative, I'm going to multiply both sides by negative 1. So y equals positive 3, because a negative 3 times a negative 1 is 3. So x equals 2, y equals 3. So my solution is 2, 3. All right, number 11. Maybe. Here we go. Solve the system of equations using substitution. So 5x plus y equals 9 and y equals 4x. So I'm just going to take this 4x and I'm going to plug it in for that y right there. That's how we substitute. So 5x plus 4x equals 9. 5x's plus 4x's is 9x's equal 9. To get rid of the 9, I divide both sides. X equals 1. And if x equals 1, I can plug that in. Y equals 4x. So y equals 4 times 1. So y is equal to 4. So my solution is x is 1 and y is 4. Again, I know we're going fast. If you need to pause the video, if you need to go back and watch it again, you're more than welcome to do so. Okay, number 12. Solve the system using elimination. So y equals negative x minus 4, y equals x squared minus 16. Okay, I'm sorry, but it says to use elimination, but both of these are y equals. So instead, I'm going to put x squared minus 16 is equal to negative x minus 4. They're both y equals. So one way, plug it in your calculator and let it solve it for you, or set them equal to each other. And then remember, I need to move everything to the same side. When I have an x squared, everything needs to come over to the left so that I'm left with 0 on the right. So I'm going to add x to both sides. So x squared plus x minus 16 equals negative 4. Then I'm going to add 4 to both sides. So x squared plus x, negative 16 plus 4 is negative 12 equals 0. So I'm looking for factors of negative 12 that add up to positive 1. So 12 and 1 are definitely not going to work. 6 and 2 are not going to work. 3 and 4 could work. They need to multiply to be a negative and add to be a positive. So my negative is going to be the 3. So that negative 3 plus 4 is positive 1. So x minus 3 and x plus 4 are equal to 0. So I factored this. And if x minus 3 equals 0 and x plus 4 equals 0, when I add 3 to both sides, x equals 3. And when I minus 4 from both sides, x equals negative 4. So I have my two x values. Now I need to figure out my y value. So I'm going to actually use this equation that I just accidentally scribbled out. I'm going to use this equation right here. So y equals negative x, which is a 3, minus 4. So negative 3 minus 4 is negative 7. So when x is 3, y is negative 7. And then I'm going to plug in the negative 4. Y equals, here's where we need to be careful. A negative 4 minus 4. Negative 4 becomes positive 4 minus 4, which is equal to 0. So x is equal to negative 4 and y is equal to 0. So those are my solutions. Solution 1 is 3, 7. And solution 2 is negative 4, 0. All right, 13. Couple more to go. Solve the system by using the elimination method. So x plus y equals 2 and y equals x squared minus 5x plus 5. So I'm going to take this y and I'm going to plug it in for that y. So I get x plus, so there's my x plus y, which I'm going to replace with x squared minus 5x plus 5 equals 2. Let's combine like terms. X minus 5x. I've got my x squared. These two go together. X minus 5x is negative 4x plus 5 equals 2. And then if I minus 2 from both sides, x squared minus 4x, 5 minus 2 is 3. So I'm looking for something that multiplies to 3 and adds up to negative 4. 1 and 3 multiply to 3. In fact, that's the only thing that does. But it needs to be a negative 4. Well, if I make both of these negative, negative 1 times negative 3 is 3. Negative 1 plus a negative 3 is negative 4. So x minus 1 and x minus 3 are equal to 0. Those are my two factors. So if x minus 1 equals 0, remember our shortcut is to take the opposite. So x equals 1 and x equals 3. And I can plug those in. I would plug them into that first one. X plus y equals 2. I'm going to replace my x with a 1. 1 plus y equals 2. And if I minus 1 from both sides, y equals 1. So when x equals 1, y is equal to 1. And then x plus y equals 2, I'm going to plug in a 3. 3 plus y equals 2. So when I minus 3 from both sides, y equals negative 1. So x is 3, y is negative 1 are my two answers. So 1, 1, there's my first answer. And then x is 3 and y is negative 1 is my second solution. All right, 14. Solve the inequality and then graph the solution. So I've got 4 times m minus 7 plus 2 is less than 10. To solve this, I need to get m by itself. So I'm going to minus 2 from both sides. And I get 4 times m minus 7 is less than 10 minus 2 is 8. To get rid of multiplying by 4, I'm going to divide both sides by 4. So m minus 7 is less than 2. And to get rid of minus 7, I add 7. So m is less than 9. That's my solution. So m is less than 9 is what I'm going to put in my solution. Then it's going to ask me to choose the correct graph. Well, m is less than 9, which means it's going to have an open circle at 9, which this one does, this one doesn't. So I know it's not this one because that has a closed circle. That has a closed circle. So it's either A or it's C. But my arrow right here points to the left, which means my arrow on my graph should also point to the left. So A is going to be the correct answer. So I can select A, and that'll be my final answer. Okay, number 15. Did that say I didn't complete the question? What else does it want me to do? I put that in. I choose the correct graph below. Okay, it did let me complete it. Sorry. All right, 15. Solve the following compound inequality. 7x is less than or equal to negative 28, or 6x is greater than or equal to 42. First of all, I just get x alone on both sides. Divide by 7, divide by 7. X is less than or equal to negative 4, or divide by 6, divide by 6. X is greater than or equal to 42 divided by 6 is 7. So x is either less than or equal to negative 4, or x is greater than or equal to 7. So that's going to be my answer right here, the one with the or in it. So negative 4 and 7 are what go in here. So I'm going to put x is less than or equal to negative 4, or x is greater than 7. So that's going to be the first part. Remember the second part, if it's an or graph, the arrows are pointed out, away from negative 4 and 7. So I look at these graphs and I look for ones, this one's pointed out, this one's pointed out, and the circles are filled in, which means that's going to be my right answer. Okay, if you have any questions from the review, please come and see me. I'm more than happy to help you out, but I can't help you if I don't really need help. So come let me know what you need me to help you with, and we'll cover anything that you missed.